Hey everybody, in this video I want to talk about something that I've been meaning to talk about for some time. It's a term that Hatsumi Soke started using many years ago, and even back in the late 80s and stuff when I had started, he would talk about this, and this became kind of the buzzword that a lot of foreign teachers coming back, they would be using this or talking about this. And it has to do with this term of feeling. You hear about this, the feeling of, or just, learn the feeling of this. And I want to break this down because it becomes a very easy label to put on things. And I think that if we really take like a very modern, mature approach to this topic, I think we can try to put it in maybe more of its proper place, because what I have noticed over the decades is this use of the term feeling has allowed a lot of people to really kind of spend too much time in their own creative mind and kind of lose that connection to in my opinion, the original purpose of it. And again, I want to make this statement very clear. These are my opinions based on my experience. I'm not here to judge or offend anybody or tell that somebody's wrong or whatever. This is just me exploring my thoughts, my opinions based on my experience and knowledge. So your mileage may vary, and that's perfectly okay. I think the fact that we can have these dialogues and we can talk about these things and consider these things is healthy for us as a community. So please take what I'm saying in the context of somebody who's just trying to explore my own understanding, but at the same time, kind of share my own understanding as well. Um, to really kind of add to the topic. So let's take a look at this. So what is feeling? First define that. Feeling has there are many kinds of feeling, and I have background, lots of study and research and stuff in human behavior, psychology, relationship, that sort of thing, and so I see this word pop up in a lot of these contexts too, and really that you have different kinds of feelings, and what you experience, the feeling that you get from that is a reactionary thing. A feeling is a reaction. So when you feel something, whether it's an emotion or whether it's a physical sensation, um, it's going to be interpreted by your brain, and it's going to be put into some sort of cohesive understanding to the best that you can. If anybody is trained with Soke, there's a lot of times that you just don't even understand what we just felt, but we felt something. And in the Bujinkan, probably one of the most significant aspects to this feeling is when we start to look at like the sakijutsu, or the Godon test, the test for Godon, where you sit and the person swings a sword at the back of your head, and you're either picking that up and moving or you're not. And I don't want to go into that. I can talk about that in another video. But there's this sense of feeling that is more deeper than what your mind interprets, what emotions are triggered, and what physical sensations are produced. There's a deeper connection, that feeling. And when I hear people talk about feeling, I step back for a second and I try to think about what aspect of that are they really referring to. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a technique where you're doing some leverage on a person and their energy comes up or their balance comes up and they get this feeling of like floating. And I was just talking about this with my students last night, and we were just working on a technique breakdown that involves leveraging, and the person rises up on their toes, and right at that moment when they rise up, that's when you're moving in and taking the space and allowing gravity and natural forces to just drop them. But it's that knowing of when to move in requires a certain feeling that you have to feel. You feel it through your hands, you feel it through, and that's the physical sensation. But also there's an innate feeling that you get, that knack of timing. And I know Hatsumi Soke has talked about these things before, in regards to knack and that sort of thing. But there's a feeling that goes with that, the feeling of when to act, when not to act, how much to act, when to pull back, how to control distance and space. All of this rides on this deep innate sense. And I think the word sense is oftentimes confused with feeling. And because they can be very similar, but they can also be very different. And in that, we need to maybe dive a little deeper on that. Let's say your teacher does a technique on you, and then like Hatsumi Soke will do this. He'll demonstrate a technique, and then he'll just say, explain and have somebody talk about it. He wants them to share their experience of that. That's another way of kind of transmitting a feeling of what that person experienced. And then other little things like, a technique will be done and they'll say, okay, remember how that felt. And again, that's all experiential. That's interpretive based on somebody's experience. Is that going to be correct? Well, that's hard to say because what is correct? In my opinion, I think it's a mistake to pre-program feeling. If I'm going to do a technique and I tell you, this is the technique, and when done correctly, this is what you should feel, I think is a mistake because in the uke, and the one who's receiving, they've already created an expectation that that's what they're supposed to feel. And when that happens, it loses that purity. It loses the authenticity of it. That different people are going to experience things in different ways. I got my senior student. He doesn't respond to pain. I mean, you can attack every Kyusho and whatever, and he just look at you. But if you understand Kyusho, it's not really about the pain. But also, I mean, you tell him, oh, it should feel like this, and he's just going to look at you and go, no, I didn't feel that. And I think that's an important thing to understand because what we think something should feel may not be how it actually feels to the person receiving it. Because essentially, you're talking about a relationship between two people. That this person is applying something or doing something, and this person is receiving that. So, how that is interpreted is based on what is this person projecting and what is this person receiving, but not just receiving, but interpreting that in their mind. So when we're talking about physical sensations, that can be a little easier. But again, when we add this kind of cloudy, guru-esque type of meaning to the term feeling, it becomes a playground for all of this creativity that people can come up with all kinds of different ideas. Oh, it took me to the afterlife, or whatever, or I saw flashes of Takamatsu Soke in my dream. I'm not discounting if that's your experience. I'm just saying that's very unique to the individual, and the person who is doing the technique may actually just be trying to get you to float on the balls of your feet and have this feeling of like you can't do anything. And that's an interesting aspect as well, because there are many techniques that when they're first applied, you feel like you're stuck or you feel like you're vulnerable. But that feeling may not necessarily match to the truth. I'll give you an example. There are old jujitsu techniques, not just in the Bujinkan. There are old ones. Daito has some stuff like that, where they'll do something and your body goes into like this sudden paralysis, like it freezes. But what's actually freezing? Is it the body or is it the mind? And I don't want to go too deep. This starts to get really out there, so I'm trying to keep this very basic. But I think you can understand what I'm saying is that oftentimes feelings themselves may not be actually true to the physical reality that exists. It's creating a reaction. Training with Hatsumi Soke, people talk about how Hatsumi looks like he just kind of disappears, or that he shape shifts and does all this other stuff. But anybody watching it, they're not experiencing that. They just see Hatsumi moves. But to the receiver, they're like, oh my gosh, this guy just split into 10 different demons or a cloudy mountain or disappears or all this kind of stuff. And it leaves them with this feeling, this fear, or this feeling of being trapped, or this feeling of helplessness or whatever, all these feelings. but it's all perceptory and interpretive based on the individual. You take a hardened war veteran, they're not going to be as impressed with some of that stuff. You take a guy that knows real fighting, he's faced life and death, he's dealt with stuff, he's going to have a far different way to receive and interpret things. His meter is going to be set very different than the person that the only fighting they've ever really experienced was roughhousing as kids, or maybe a couple of school fights, and then they take up martial arts, and it's in this controlled environment. So to them, maybe they might be a little bit more reactionary. Maybe the creative mind might go off in some of these other directions because that's what their perspective is built on. So I'm not trying to knock people that talk about the feeling. I just want to maybe share some other kinds of perspective about it, to not allow ourselves to be just so black and white about this. This is a very, very complex topic, that's easy for us to fall onto as a safety net for ourselves, where we can do a technique and the Kihon sucks, but we're like, oh, but the feeling you get, oftentimes, and again, I'm not trying to critique anybody in particular, but there are people whose Kihon is horrible, but they mask it with the idea of doing this particular feeling, the feeling of Kotoru, the feeling of Gyoku, but they can't even do the Kamae of that Ruha correctly, or they can't move in that according to how Kotoru uh, uh, kata is done. But then they're like, oh, but this is the feeling of. So again, I urge caution with using these terms too loosely, and encourage you to really explore what that means, and to know that a lot of this stuff is about human psychology. Human psychology is such an intricate and essential aspect to martial arts, and specifically to our Bujinkan training. And the way the mind receives, interprets, and projects, the way we communicate, the way we represent, the way we approach ourselves, the way we approach this art, all the relationships that are involved, this is all human psychology. And when we're talking about, and this is another important aspect of this, when we're talking about language and culture and history and trying to understand it from a foreign perspective, I think is also really, really difficult. You can be a foreign student and speak the Japanese language fluently, but still miss the deep significance, because you're looking at it as a linear approach, that your mindset is still in your foreign perspective. But even the native Japanese have a hard time understanding a lot of the teachings that come from our Bujinkan training, or like with Hatsumi and Hatsumi Soke and the things that he talks about. Even my own shodo that I have from, excuse me, even my own shodo that I have from Hatsumi Soke that he painted for me, the Ryoko Hikan shodo, he did it so beautifully and poetic, but none of the native Japanese that were there that even knew what it is. Like, they couldn't even understand it. So language becomes a very difficult thing to try to interpret. And I know Hatsumi Soke over the decades has used language very flowerly. He's tried to pick specific words to create a certain effect or to highlight certain things. But in our minds, we hear an English word and we apply our own cultural meaning to that word, but it may not actually be exactly what was intended. So I think with the word feeling, we kind of fall into some of that. And people can use it in their own perspective, and but without being corrected on it, stuff they think they're right, and it's understandable, but maybe it's not quite exactly what was meant. And the danger with that is, just like anything, like a golf shot, if you could be a hair off in the initial drive, by the time it reaches the end of the fairway, it's completely off in the bushes. So when we take these things and we start to just run with them without taking time to explore them deeply, to really see, is this really what was meant? Am I applying this correctly? Be very mindful about all of that. we can really end up off in the weeds with this stuff. So again, if that's you in the sense that you believe strongly in approaching your training from this feeling kind of perspective, I'm not judging you on that. And certainly there are some phenomenal instructors out there that use that in their training, and it's perfectly okay. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying let's maybe take a little deeper dive into what that means and actually look at it from a psychological point of view, that you have the physiological, psychological, and emotional, right? All three of those levels, the sunshine of the person, uh, mind, body, spirit, or emotion. But you want to approach that from those three levels, but also understand that there is a deeper level to this. There's a feeling that is underneath all of that. And that's the part that is the most difficult to understand. That's the part that really I don't think you can apply words to that. And you you know, like people trying to describe their Godon test, it's sometimes the words just don't come out right. It just doesn't. You just can't put definition to it. It's the feeling, but you can't describe it. You just know what it feels like. And I think that, in my opinion, is probably more of what this word feeling is coming from. So I hope this makes sense. I hope you found it enlightening and interesting. And please, subscribe to my channel if you're not doing it already. I want to continue having these talks. I've gotten so much good positive feedback from people. I've got some really interesting things coming up with some partnerships, in particular with one gentleman that I absolutely respect and value his input, and he has helped me and I'm not giving out his name just yet because I don't have permission. But I really really appreciate all his support. I'm just a guy on the path, just like everybody else. I'm not trying to promote myself to be, this or that, or I don't even want my title, rank, none of this to even exist in here. I'm just a fellow martial artist that's been in this a very long time. That's trained in a lot of other different arts, have a lot of different experiences, both in real world application as well as in the dojo. And I've also trained with a lot of different martial arts who are very high level, very good, and very knowledgeable, and gleaned some wisdom from them as well. This is my way of just sharing that with you. So I hope you see it for what it's worth. And again, I greatly appreciate all the constructive feedback I've received and all the support. Please like my channel. And right now, I just have this old cheap laptop and my camera, but maybe eventually, if people want to crowdfund me or something, I'll get some better studio and cameras and sound. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, again, I really appreciate that, and I really hope that you approach your training with a real high level of sincerity. Let go of all the trinkets and the titles and the politics and the infighting and stuff. Ultimately, this is about you and yourself. That's it. You were born alone, you're going to go out alone. And the warrior path, the training path, really is about you. It's a deep dive study in yourself and how you fit in this world and your relationship to everything, including yourself and outside of yourself. That's the real Shugyo. That's the real path. And yeah, we can talk about war and fighting and everything else, but isn't conflict just another form of relationship between people? It's a violent relationship, but everything really just boils down to you. And so you it's good to be honest and not just accept things at face value and ask the deeper questions. Um, Especially when we're talking about lessons and wisdom and stuff that go back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years with literally thousands of people, bloodshed and horror and tragedy, but also great enlightenment and great wisdom coming from all of that. Not everybody were these hardcore, hard charging samurai, kill and bloodshed. There's a lot of great spiritual, and I don't mean this necessarily in a religious sense, but just a lot of great awakening and spirituality that comes from these teachings too that we can learn from. I mean, a lot of these old guys, that could be that's how they dealt with maybe PTSD and and the trauma that comes from living this type of life that, for generations and generations of just horrible things, that they learn some things, how to cope with life, how to still be happy in times of great turmoil. Here we get, oh my gosh, my gym is closed down. I can't teach in my dojo. I can't go sit in a pub and have a drink because of COVID. Oh, my life is terrible. What am I going to do? That, in my opinion, uh, we could really learn a whole lot more from the wisdom of these guys than just how to make a proper fist. But that's for another topic. But I really, really appreciate all the support, and I really encourage you to stay on your path and step back. Let's all just step back, take a breath, reevaluate where we are as a community, as a Bujinkan community, and also ourselves as, excuse me, as martial artists, and just be honest, just be clear about ourselves, our intent, what we want, where we're going. We're all on our own path, and it's perfectly okay if we have choices that don't always align with somebody else's choices. It's okay, because only you're only responsible for yourself. So anyway, that's my little soapbox. I hope you found it encouraging. But thanks again. And as I always say, stay happy, stay healthy, and no matter what, just keep training.